I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us, a bit of a regular guest. Really like having him on. He writes a lot of creative stuff, and he recently brought up the fact about how the states have gotten into even deeper trouble. The ones that were already in deep trouble, like Kentucky and California and Illinois, are in deeper trouble now because of the COVID thing. And that's going to be something that's going to be coming down the pipe. John Rubino of dollarcollapse.com. Thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Hey Greg, good to be back. So have you noticed our pattern? How every time we talk, the world is a little bit crazier than it was the time before?
Yeah,
I don't like where we're going.
I, but unfortunately, that's just the way it's going, especially with the crazy election. We did get Coney Barrett in the Supreme Court, so that's going to stop a lot of the election fraud. Counting ballots with no signatures that match, and 10 days. Expanding the election by judges ex post factos and all that. We'll talk about that in a minute, about the violence that just happened up in Philadelphia. But I want to talk about the states. The states are in deep financial trouble, and the poster child for deep financial trouble is Illinois. And you wrote about this just a few weeks ago. Let's talk about how this is going to be. This is covered over with all the other stuff going on, but this is a big problem that ain't going away.
Yeah, a lot of states, actually, state and local finances will be one of the big stories of the next few years because a lot of states and a lot of cities basically ran, you have to call it a scam, where years ago they decided to offer wildly overgenerous pensions to public sector unions. And in return for that, the public sector unions elected people who would keep on doing that, who would keep the gravy train going. And it worked for a long time because back then, the baby boomer cops and teachers and firefighters were a long way from retirement. So it worked financially, but now they're all retiring. And these states and cities are headed for some version of bankruptcy at an accelerating rate. And it was always going to happen over the next decade. But with the pandemic, the time frame has been moved way up. So probably 2021 is going to be a year in which a lot of these guys hit a wall where they have no choice but to default on a lot of their obligations, which is just going to throw the financial system into turmoil because, the muni bond market will freak out if states and localities start going bankrupt and or just defaulting. And they'll need big bailouts if we're going to prevent that. So next year, we will see either the federal government bailing out Chicago and Illinois and New York and Kentucky and California to the tune of several $trillions, or allowing them to just go bankrupt with all the financial markets turmoil that implies. And, it depends on this. I guess this election determines which of those that it'll be. The Democrats, if they come in, will immediately bail out all the state and local governments. And if the Republicans come in, they won't want to do that. So they'll try not to. So we'll see. But the fact that these big entities are on the verge of bankruptcy means that one way or another, we have some serious financial turmoil ahead of us that hits the fixed income market. Which means, the bond market is bigger than the stock market. So if there's turmoil there, there's turmoil everywhere. And we are looking at that one way or another in the year ahead.
If you take a look at Illinois, Illinois is, to me, almost surreal. In the 2021 budget, the governor, Pritzker, is counting on $5 billion to balance his budget. That's like, oh yeah, we'll balance our budget and we'll borrow $5 billion. It's like, it's unreal. They're counting on the Federal Reserve. They've already borrowed twice from the Federal Reserve's window. Illinois is in deep trouble. Could one state basically start a daisy chain of defaults in municipal bonds and state bonds and things like that? Also they're paying 4.5%, and they're not even junk yet.
Yeah, they're one step away from junk, at which point the interest rate they have to pay is like 6%, at least today. It could be a lot higher when it happens, which means that there's no point in borrowing, right? If if you're paying that much, you might as well just start defaulting everywhere, and that's liable to be what happens. See, it's not clear how states go bankrupt because they can't really do that in a lot of cases legally. But if they can't pay their bills, they have to not pay their bills. I mean, if something can't happen, it won't happen. So you get effective bankruptcy via defaults for a lot of these places. And again, that means massive layoffs of city and state workers and turmoil in the bond markets. And see, that kind of thing alone is enough to send the U.S. back into recession, assuming we're out of recession when it happens. Um, but combine it with all the other stuff we'll have going on, and it's going to be one of those perfect storm scenarios where everywhere you look, somebody is in trouble and demanding a federal bailout. And the federal government will feel like it has no choice but to start writing those checks. So here's what that means. If the federal government ends up bailing out everybody in sight, then, they got a printing press, they can do it. They can paper over Illinois mismanagement and Chicago mismanagement, and basically bail out the politicians who did all these things there, but at the cost of shifting the burden over to the financial markets in general and to the currency markets in particular. Because when people see, $1 trillion of bailouts here, $1 trillion of bailouts there, one of the things they will conclude is that maybe you don't want to hold the currency of a country that is doing this. And then the US starts looking an awful lot like Illinois does now, in other words, not a AAA credit. And that's when the death spiral starts. So that's, the dollar collapse thesis is basically that. We hit a point where we have to bail out everybody in sight. And this causes people to lose faith in the currency. And then it's game over because the federal government no longer has the tools that it needs to stave off disaster. And, that was always a kind of an intermediate term thing, 3 to 5 years. But thanks to the pandemic, it is now imminent. Something like that could happen in 2021 very easily once all these bailouts get going.
You're talking about defaulting on your debts. They're already kind of doing that. I mean, a few years ago, they owed Illinois. Just talk about Illinois. They owed $6 billion, and that means people, did some work and submitted a bill. And Illinois went, yeah, let's just put this over here in this jar over here. Yeah, we don't have the money. And then now it's up to $8 billion. So they got another $2 billion of people who did work and they didn't pay. On top of, I think one of your pieces about how states go bankrupt, they're $137 billion underfunded in their pensions. I mean, they basically bought all these votes. And now they're going to have to tell all the people that voted for them, yeah, sorry, man. Yeah, we don't have the money.
And that's the last thing they want to do because public sector unions are who keep you in power if you're running one of these states or if you're running a big city like Chicago. So you can't cross them. But there's going to be a point where there's no choice, that you can't pay everybody and you have to choose who not to pay. So right now, states like Illinois don't pay their contractors on time. So if you're a contractor out there, you're in kind of a tough spot because, you really want state business because in theory, it's really lucrative, but there's a good chance you won't get paid, which is the opposite of a lucrative business. So, you got to feel sorry for these guys who are on the hook for that $8 billion you were talking about because it's possible they never see it, which means they lay off their workers, they declare bankruptcy. It doesn't matter. Well, I mean, it matters, but there are mass layoffs coming one way or another. It's just a question of who gets laid off and how big the impact is on the overall economy and what that forces the federal government to do. So this is an ongoing story, but I think a lot of these cities and states are basically pinning their hopes now on a bailout because they can't fix things themselves. They've screwed things up to the point where there is no local fix that's feasible. So they're hoping that the Fed just creates 3 or 4 trillion new dollars out of thin air and hands it to them, which, by the way, is what a lot of people are hoping out there right now. It's not just the cities and the states. There are industries everywhere you look who are hoping for a federal bailout. And if they don't get it, they're gone.
And what happens to the currency? That's back to your dollar collapse thesis.
That's the big question. Yeah.
When you started your website, nobody envisioned that the conservative party would be offering 1.8 trillion, and that wouldn't be enough on top of the trillions. That's what the Republicans are offering, 1.8 trillion. And Nancy, they've raised it from, I don't know, $1.3 trillion, $1.5 trillion, $1.6 trillion, $1.8 trillion. No, not enough. And I'm thinking,
Oh, sorry.
This is
Go
on
ahead.
top of the $1 trillion already. Go ahead.
Well, that's how we know that the old game is pretty much over, because even when the party of small government is in charge, we still run $1 trillion deficits. In the 10th year of this expansion, before the pandemic hit, we were running $1 trillion+ deficits at the federal level, and corporate debt was rising at a record pace, and student debt and car loans. Every imaginable kind of debt was soaring. And that was at the point in the expansion when normally people are paying off their debts because things are so good, they've got extra money. But it didn't happen this time. And it didn't happen under Republicans. So, let the Democrats take over, who are not the party of small government, and they won't have anything standing in their way. There's no philosophical point of small government for the Democrats. They are very happy to spend as much as it takes to get whatever they want. And I'm criticizing them, but I'm not criticizing them relative to the Republicans now, because the Republicans have proven themselves to be just as bad. So whoever is in charge next year and in the subsequent years is going to spend insane amounts of money, borrow insane amounts of money, lean on the Fed to create insane amounts of money, and it's all going to be tossed into the system. So the question is, what happens at that point? Where's our limit for new currency creation and credit creation? And if there is a limit, and if we're heading for it at an accelerating rate, when do we hit it? So it's now not if, but when. It's a question of timing. When does this thing blow up on us? Because the currency is no longer holding its value. And you can't know that for sure, but man, the numbers, Greg, are insane right now. We're running a deficit of 10% of GDP this year, and it doesn't look any better for next year. And there's no reason to think that we can even hold it to 10% of GDP, because so many industries are in need of bailouts now. They're holding on by their fingernails. If you're an airline company, or a hotel company or something like that, you can't make payroll, and you are going bankrupt in the near future unless the federal government bails you out. So there are going to be a lot of hands out at the Fed, looking for $500 billion here, $2 trillion there, and they're not going to be able to say no to any of it. So that's what next year looks like, and it's from a financial standpoint, terrifying prospect.
When you said we're going to find out what our limit is, what does the limit look like? What is the limit when we hit our limit? What does it look like?
Well, it looks
because we're going to hit it.
It looks like something called the crack-up boom from the Austrian School of Economics. And that is a point at which a critical mass of people conclude that it's the policy, the official policy of the government, to make the currency worth less and less year after year. And they conclude from that is that there's no reason to hold the currency, so they just dump it. As soon as they get paid or get money some other way, they go out and buy real assets, farmland, well-chosen rental properties, gold and silver. And those things start to soar. So that's where you see inflation manifest itself, as most people define inflation, soaring prices. And that begins to destabilize the system, because once people see that happening, even people who weren't thinking about this subject before get clued in, and they join the bandwagon. And so things just run out of control. The dollar starts to fall at an accelerating rate. The price of real stuff, in other words, money flowing, the amount of money flowing from financial assets that are getting creamed by this process into real assets that are going up, becomes a deluge. And there's no way to stop it, because if you don't have a functioning currency, you can't intervene in these markets and manipulate them anymore. And that point is out there. It was always out there, but now it's a lot closer than it was because of the pandemic. So 2021 is going to be a fascinating year. We'll see if the government even tries to stop this process, or if they just go for it, and just bail out everybody in sight and let the chips fall where they may.
Well, people like Mitch McConnell are saying, you let them go bankrupt. I mean, that's what the Democrats are. Well, they're saying just let them go bankrupt. Well, yeah, because it's going to make them look bad. I mean, they promised all this stuff, and they're going to say, yeah, sorry. I mean, I was talking to you about this in the pre-interview. People are like, well, they're going to pay me my pension. Really? The Teamsters. You think you're tougher than the Teamsters? Teamsters are pretty tough, aren't they? I mean, they cement people into walls of stadiums, right? They're pretty tough. They lost half their pension What are you going to do, Mr. State Worker?
Yeah,
Right?
well,
When they say,
I
hey,
mean,
we're going to cut your pension by half or two-thirds or by three-fourths. I mean, well, I owe this money. Well, if they can pay you, you owe the money.
well, if we think the civil unrest of this year was dramatic and terrifying, wait till they start trying to cut pensions in these big cities, and you see the cops go on strike, the firefighters go on strike, and teachers unions hit the streets. And it's going to be much, much more serious because those are, they're just bigger numbers. There are way more people in public sector unions than there are in the streets in any major city right now. So what we could see is going to be a lot more dramatic and a lot scarier for politicians, which is why I think they'll all cave because, we're talking millions of voters out there who are now threatened by seeing their pensions. They thought they were going to retire with a certain amount of money coming in, and they played by the rules and everything. It's not an individual teacher or firefighter or cop that's at fault here.
That's
You know,
right.
they were snowed just like taxpayers were snowed, by these plans that said, oh, yeah, we'll generate 8% on our investments and we'll cover our obligations with no trouble, and everybody just believed that. And it turned out not to be true. So everybody is going to feel cheated, whether it's the taxpayers who have to pay massively higher taxes to cover these pensions, or the pensioners who find out they only are only going to get 40% of what they thought they were going to, there are no winners in any of this. There are just people who lose less badly than others. And, I have a series on dollarcollapse.com called Welcome to the Third World that covers different aspects of this. And basically what happens when cities and states run out of money is that services get cut and there's civil unrest and people make way less money because, state and city workers are a big part of the economy and they're being cut back dramatically. So all of a sudden nothing works anymore. So Chicago starts to look like Caracas or someplace. Which to Americans is really jarring because we think systems that work is our birthright. In other words, things get done here. There's not too much corruption, at least not too much visible corruption. And when you need something, you go to the government office and you get it. When you have a problem, you call the cops and they show up, or the firefighters and they show up. All of that stops, when this process really gets going. So it's financial to start with, but it becomes political and social at some point. And that's when things get really scary because you just don't know how people are going to react to something like that. Because when your assumptions about your lifestyle are challenged in a really fundamental way, as Gerald Salente likes to say, when people lose everything, they lose it, and that is our future. So there's an investment thesis that flows from this that has to be talked about because you can drive yourself crazy just pointing out all the horrible things that are going to happen as we run out of money and and people hit the streets or things stop working, et cetera, et cetera. But as the old saying goes, from chaos comes opportunity, and there are a lot of opportunities created by this, and I find it helps keep me sane to focus on the ways you can make money from all this terrible stuff that's coming.
As long as your house doesn't burn down.
Yep.
long as,
Yeah.
long as you don't have to shoot somebody breaking into your house and then the cops never show up or whatever. I
Well,
mean,
and
that's
that's
the problem.
that's coming for a lot of people because one of the things that will happen is that there will be civil unrest and there will be slower and slower police response times. So the world gets very threatening very quickly at some point.
Is this why you've seen this big giant, I mean, record amount of first time gun buyers, record amount of people arming up with military style stuff? I mean, you're just seeing, the trends are people are arming up. You can't find ammunition. I think Walmart pretty much quit selling handgun ammunition and 223 and all kinds of other stuff. The ammunition is, went from, oh, hey, this is 25 cents a round. Now it's $4 a round for a, some shotgun, special shotgun shell or whatever. I mean, the ammunition's in short supply. Gun buying is going off the charts. Is this why you're seeing it? People smell what's coming?
Oh, absolutely. We are gearing up for at least civil unrest, and maybe civil war. That's, I think a lot of people have that in mind, that they want to come out on top of whatever's coming, and they're afraid that what's coming is going to be life threatening. A funny story. My wife is in all the time I've known her, she's been a non-political liberal. In other words, just a compassionate person who wants the government to help people, and values trust in politics and things like that. And she is so appalled by what's happening with the COVID-19 response. That they're locking us all down for something that she doesn't think is that serious. That she has become a prepper. She came to me the other day and said, "Hey, we should get some guns." And if you knew my wife, you'd see what an amazing change that is. But I think a lot of people are going through that same kind of thing, where they basically thought the systems had their back. In other words, the police would take care of them, the schools would educate their kids, the libraries would be there with plenty of books, the firefighters would be, all that stuff would be there. And now they're seeing that maybe not. Maybe they need to fend for themselves, and they're taking steps. On the nonviolent side of the spectrum, the hottest part of the real estate market right now is rural land. Everybody
Yeah.
wants a homestead because they want to be able to grow their own food, besides being able to protect themselves and being far away from civil unrest and stuff. So, we're seeing a serious societal change, which, you screw up your finances, it screws up your politics. And then when you screw up your politics, it feeds back into finance. And so the migration out of cities and the prepper movement and gun buying and all that's all part of this process. And there's no reason to think that it goes away anytime soon, because we're not fixing any of our big problems. We're still borrowing record amounts of money. The stuff that we did to cause this problem, we're still doing it. And we're doing it on a bigger scale than ever before. So it's reasonable to think that whatever we think of as our problems right now will seem tiny compared to what we think of as our problems in a year or two.
And you think 2021 is the year? You were thinking that this was going to be put off 4, 5, 6 years if it wasn't for COVID. At the beginning of January of 2020, you were thinking, okay, this is 5, 6, 7 years away. Now you're saying, oh no, the 2021 is when the rubber meets the road. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I was thinking that you couldn't tell when inevitable became imminent yet. You couldn't put a date on this, although the stuff was clearly coming. But this year, we basically went broke this year. We shut down the economy, and we're borrowing money at emergency rates now. So wherever that wall was out there, we brought it forward dramatically. Which means that next year, the federal government has to confront a lot of this stuff, because states and cities without a big bailout are bankrupt. There is no mathematical way that they survive from here on out unless we bail them out. And so we got to do it next year. So that's a big decision point there. Are we going to bail out everybody inside? Because if we bail out Chicago, we got to bail out United Airlines, right? Or Carnival Cruise Lines, or on and on and on. We and all the hotel chains out there. The occupancy rate for New York City hotels is 10% right now.
I think the office rate is equal to that. They're
Yeah.
only using 10% of their office rate capacity right now. I was saying this to on the air the other day, and somebody called me from actually one of my old people I used to work with at ABC, and I said, I'm looking down at Fox's bumper. They're shooting a bumper outside on Avenue of the Americas. It goes north and it looks black. It's actually going into the Central Park, right? And it's Radio City Music Hall right there. These iconic places. And I'm looking down the street and I went, oh my gosh, there are no cars. It goes north. It goes towards. There are no cars. There's one person walking across the street. One. I'm thinking, holy cow! It's 8:05. 8:10, something like that, shooting a bumper. Oh, we'll be right back after this commercial break. Shooting in the street, which would be at 8 o'clock in the evening, 8:10 in the evening, would be packed with people, right? In front of Radio City Music Hall on Avenue of the Americas. One person walking across the street. No cars.
Some big cities are like ghost towns right now. And that means that all the money that used to be made there is not being made. And we're finding that out in the junk bond market. There are companies going bankrupt right now. And I was a junk bond analyst way back when. That was my first real finance job in the 1980s. When that market blew up, I spent a year doing workouts where, all the guys who lent money to a company that has gone bankrupt sit around a table and carve that financial carcass up, trying to get what they can. And back then, it was a brutal process, but we ended up getting some assets out of it. Now they're reporting that a lot of bankrupt companies, when the bondholders show up for their cut of whatever's left, they're getting nothing. They're getting like 1%, which implies two things. One is that COVID-19 has made a lot of assets worth a lot less. Like what is a JCPenney store worth now? It's not clear it's worth anything, right? And the second thing that it means is that we've been on a lending binge and a borrowing binge, such that a lot of companies are so over leveraged that if they blow up, there's nothing left for anybody.
Wow.
And when that becomes apparent, that's going to spook the bond market too. That's the corporate bond market there. So we'll have the municipal bond market being spooked by Chicago going bankrupt, and the corporate bond market being spooked by a lot of these, these zombie companies, these junk bond borrowers, going bust and leaving nothing for anybody. So one of the big stories going forward will be the reluctance of anybody to lend money for anything.
Wow.
and the system breaks down if that happens, right? If you are a fracker or something that needs to be able to borrow money via junk bonds in order to continue, and nobody wants to lend money to the junk market anymore, then you're gone. And your assets are not worth anything either, which just exacerbates the process.
Wow.
So that's out there. I'm hesitant to put a date on it, but man, so much of this stuff just seems like it's here now. So after the election, that's when it really comes to a head.
You think
so,
it's 20?
Yeah,
you think 2021 is going to be a pivotal year?
it sure looks like it, because a lot of this stuff was caused by the pandemic lockdown. And unless bailouts happen right away, we're going to see bankruptcies everywhere you look. And that's going to spook the bond market, which, that means higher interest rates, basically, if the bond market is spooked, which will crush stocks because, right now, a 3% dividend stock looks good compared to bond interest rates. But if bond rates spike back to 3, 4, 5, 6%, all of a sudden that stock doesn't look nearly as good as a treasury bond yielding the same amount. So you'll see money pour out of the stock market at the same time, too. That is if we don't have massive bailouts. If we have massive bailouts, then a ton of that money will flow into financial assets. And government bonds and blue chip stocks will be okay, but everything else will crash and burn. So, there's no good way out of this, Greg. Everything is a choice of types of pain. That's all we have left is, do you want this kind of a crisis or that kind of a crisis? And, we'll be having to make these decisions starting as soon as the next administration takes office.
If we do bail everything out, I mean, we're talking tens of trillions of dollars. We're talking trillions of dollars on top of everything else. If we do bail everything out, then the other choice of pain is massive inflation, right?
Well, that would be what we'll go for. We're going to try to devalue the big currencies. The euro and the yen and the dollar have to go down in value in order to make the debt we've taken on already manageable, because you pay it back in cheaper dollars, and that's something you might be able to do as opposed to paying it back in current dollars, which you absolutely can't do in a lot of cases.
Nobody in the world's going to catch on to that scam.
Yeah. Well, you know what? When they won't catch on to it right away because we're used to just thinking of our currency as the environment. It's just reality, what is, there's no change in it. But once it starts to change and a certain number of people do catch onto it, then it'll happen all at once. Like the old Ernest Hemingway quote from a friend of his who went bankrupt. I went bankrupt very slowly at first and then all at once. So it's the all at once thing that we're headed for, because we are going slowly right now. We're going bankrupt slowly, but the day will come when everything just falls off the table, and you really don't want to be there when it happens. You do not want to have a traditional 60-40 stock and bond portfolio when that day arrives. So a lot of people who have portfolios constructed by mainstream financial planners are the ones who are going to be hurt by this. And the kind of the fringe people like the stackers and the preppers, their finances will be in pretty good shape because those things will be helped by what's coming. So, long-suffering silver stackers, for instance, who have, been buying silver eagles, meanwhile watching Tesla stock go through the roof and Netflix and Google and everything, they'll be rewarded eventually.
Okay. Dollarcollapse.com. You have a sign-up page for emails. I don't get paid anything on this, folks. So just to let you know, everybody that I ever put up their links, their pay pages, their whatever, I never get a piece of the action. I just do it because John was kind enough to come on, and I put all everybody's what they do up. And you just have a sign-up page where you send out free articles that you write. You're a pretty prolific writer. Is that right?
Yeah, you just pop your email address in there and you'll get whatever I write going forward.
Okay. Dollarcollapse.com. Fantastic site. You're an aggregator. You really pull some great stuff that you don't see often. You're a very prolific writer. You write very unusual, very timely, pertinent stuff like this whole thing about Illinois, about how states, this is how states go bankrupt, right? And so that was one of the pieces you did, I think, October 23rd. But anyway, lots of great stuff from John Rubino of dollarcollapse.com. John Rubino, thank you for joining us today on usawatchdog.com.
Thanks, Greg.